Welcome to Typecasting, where we're typing our favorite fictional characters on the Enneagram and taking on pop culture by the numbers.
Hello and welcome to the 2021 Dundee Awards.
Okay, so that is so funny because my intro about here's your host, Lucas Graydon, is about the Dundies also. So here we go.
Oh, okay.
That's your host, Lucas Graydon, who would have the most amount of Dundies, most saying, biggest smile, and brightest personality in Pennsylvania.
Thank you. And that's your co-host, Mirjana Tumatua, the apple of my eye and the paper of my printer. Does that make sense? I was trying to
paper of your purr?
You know how it printer.
That's so weird.
Like Dunder Mifflin Paper Company.
I know, but what is printer's relation to paper?
Printers need paper to exist. They give the printer meaning.
Okay,
a printer is nothing without its paper.
Okay, weirdo. Oh my gosh. Well, I'm so excited to talk about The Office again today.
Yes, we are in our final episode for The Office, and I'm a little sad because I've had a lot of fun rewatching some episodes. Only seasons 1 and 2, I will say that's the majority of my recent watch because those are the only ones that are free to watch on Peacock.
So you can, and honestly, I would say it gets a little better at season 3. It's probably my favorite. When I start to like the characters. That's when Andy comes, right?
I know. I do miss Andy in these and Aaron. I love Aaron.
I can see that you love Aaron. I can I don't know. You give that vibe off somehow.
Well, maybe it's because I think that I share a lot in common with Andy, and you know how they have their relationship, Andy before they make him the worst character on the show. I like to believe I'm good Andy.
That is so funny. You kind of are. Let's just say it. I think Andy's a 4. I mean, he's not one of our characters this episode. He's
not, but I would say a 4-wing 3 or a 3-wing 4. I think he is in that gap.
I think he would try a little bit harder if he were a 3.
He just loves his Cornell a cappella group so much. He gets that thrill from performance.
He's a bad salesman. He's one of the worst.
True.
He's only above Ryan. And I think he would be a better salesman if he were a 3. Because he always would pick the drama or the showmanship over being good. You know what I mean?
Interesting. Well, maybe we should just throw Andy onto the pile. Who is on our list to type today? I guess is a good question.
Oh my goodness. Well, let me get us kicked off with Jim Halpert. How does that sound?
Jim. Okay. Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Well, Jim Halpert is America's heartthrob. Everyone loves Jim. Again, I'm not the biggest. I love The Office, but not the biggest fan of each individual character. Go ahead and slander me. It's fine. I'm I think it's okay. Do you think he's a little bit of a bully? But whatever. So Jim Halpert is a salesman at Dunder Mifflin. Eventually he becomes a co-manager at Dunder Mifflin Paper Company, and he kind of has this air about him that he's just this is just his job. His job is not his life. He has life outside of Dunder Mifflin, but he has a big fat crush on Pam Beesly, who we'll also be talking about today.
So this year, for the first time ever, I got Pam in Secret Santa, and I got her this teapot, which I know she really wants, so she can make tea at her desk. But I'm also going to stuff it with some inside jokes. This is my high school yearbook photo. She saw it at the party, and it really makes her laugh. Not sure why. What else? Ooh, this is a hot sauce packet. She put this on a hot dog a couple years ago because she thought it was ketchup. And it was really funny, so I kept the other 2. This would take a little too long to explain, so I won't. And this is a card. Because Christmas is the time to tell people how you feel.
And they end up getting married in the end, which is really, really sweet. Not even in the end, in the middle, and have a life together. So he's known for kind of loving sports. He's kind of like a guy's guy, like just like traditional male. Big prankster as well.
I was just reading online the other day, funny enough, about somebody who said that The Office loses its steam when Jim and Pam get married. And they were saying that it's because like they are the emotional core of the show. And once like they resolve that overarching story, they think that that's when the show starts to forget what it's about and like where it's at. I have not seen the whole series long enough or recently enough to know if I agree with that assessment or not, but I thought it was really interesting, like speaking of their relationship and everything.
That is so interesting. And one of the things that I learned listening to the Office Ladies podcast, we'll give them a shout out, so then they'll give us a shout out. I think that's how that works.
Exactly. Yes. Angela, Jenna, I know you're listening.
Yes. Hey, girls. Hey, ladies. One of the things that they spoke about, the difference between the English version of The Office, which is the original Office, and this one, was that they decided to make the American one a love story with all of the rest of it. So the love story was at the center of the American first 3 seasons. But in England, it was more like a comedy first and the love story second. And really even not even second, like fourth maybe. And so it's really cool to see how that's like evident. And that's kind of why Pam and Jim are the main characters, apart from Michael and Dwight. But like it's a really interesting play.
Well, yeah, because like obviously you have Michael and Dwight as like I think some of the funniest characters, and they're the ones that like the jokes get played on, or like they're the ones that we're laughing at. But the emotional heavy lifting, like the heart of the show, I think is really in Jim and Pam's relationship. So I'm very excited to talk about these characters, but I am very scared to talk about Jim.
Really? Why?
So I know that usually like it would be my turn to say what I think his type is. I have literally written down every single number in a list in my notes. And for most of them, I just wrote no. For some of them, I wrote maybe. And for one of them, I just wrote a question mark because I'm so lost on this man. And I think maybe it's because, like you said, his life, like he does not want his work to be his life. And so maybe that's why I feel like he's guarded and I don't know what's going on behind his head. But also, I feel like his main personality traits are playing pranks on Dwight and being in love with Pam. And I'm like, there's not a type for like the prankster with a crush. You know, like I'm like, I do not have a grasp on this man's character. I
do want to add something if you're about to go into his Enneagram.
Yeah. You go.
I do think that it might have been intentional. I have no idea. But one of the things I know about like Stephanie Myers, who wrote Twilight, is people always like make fun of Bella because she has no personality. But that was like intentional because it was a book first. And the author really wanted young women to be able to put themselves in Bella's situation. And so often she doesn't even have like, she's just like responding to what's going on around her. And so when then they brought it to screen, it was kind of a little more difficult because she was hard to act. And I think in the same way, Jim's that way, like where he's supposed to be kind of like the man of America, you know, like white man of America and his experience where it's like, you can just like live through him.
Yes.
And so like, that's why his character traits are things that are happening or have happened to him.
Right.
You know?
I think you're totally right. Where like, I think a lot of different protagonists struggle with that because if you give the protagonist like too strong of a personality, you may have audience members who struggle to like relate or like imagine themselves in that situation or like as that person, but you want as many people as possible to relate to Jim. So I think that that's where I think you're totally right. I think it's a feature of the writing and like of the character design. But that's also to say I'm very, very lost with his character type and my like the smallest little foothold that I have on any of the numbers, and then I'm really excited to hear what you have to say, because I will probably just agree with whatever you say, was maybe the type 7, and that's just because of the pranks, but I think like he enjoys laughing and making people laugh. Like I think that he uses pranking Dwight often as a point of connection for him and Pam, and like those are the things that they bond over as they are flirting over the first few seasons. And I think that he finds comfort in that joy, and so to me, I was like, well, 7s are kind of the class clown a lot of the times. And I think Jim is kind of the class clown. That's like my only little shot in the dark. But what do you think? I need some help. I'm
so
phoning a friend.
Yeah, I think 7, I think I can see where you're coming from. I don't think his like inclination is like, I think, okay, I have a couple things here. My gut reaction, and I was actually like I'm really excited about this, and because I think he's our first 9.
Really?
Yeah, I definitely do. I think one of the reasons that I think that, first of all, he is so nervous to rock the boat in the first 3 seasons. I think he has a lot of fun and a lot of care and like understands people really well. And like part of the reason he can get under Dwight's skin is because he knows it's going to get under Dwight's skin in a way that 9s are really good at that and great observers. And he's really good at reacting to what's happening in front of him, aka why he's a really good salesman. He's not super motivated, so I think that's part of it. But I also think like him just not coming clean about Pam, like we see a lot of his issues are just because he doesn't deal with the thing that is going to cause him pain, right? So like he doesn't, oh gosh, what is her name?
Karen?
Amy Adams.
Oh, Amy Adams.
No. Amy Adams' character in the show, I don't know what her name is. When he dates
Amy Adams. I mean,
and like
we know.
I mean, she's Amy Adams. When he dates Amy Adams in the show, and like he's just like so in love with Pam, and he's just like too afraid to rock the boat. He wants to keep the peace. He doesn't like. He's not even like really interested in Amy freaking Adams. And like he just like doesn't necessarily like move forward with it. He just like he can't tell Pam in the later seasons about his new job and why he wants to take it, and how like he just, instead of like dealing with the problems head on, he decides not to deal with them, and they kind of cause a little more issues, which is something I think a lot of our 9s can relate to. And he's also like, everyone kind of thinks Jim's their best friend. Like we'll talk about Kelly later, but like Kelly thinks that he's your best friend. Dwight, like, even though they hate each other, like they're best. Like, in the end, he's his best man in the wedding. And like, I just think of like how the 9s in our lives, like I'm like always feel so incredibly close to them because of like what a great friend they are and how willing they are to like take me as I am. And I think like I see a lot of that in Jim. I do think he has a wing 8, because I think like he's so like ferociously just how he is with Dwight and how he can justify how he is with Dwight. I think is a little bit of an 8 tendency, but I'm like I'm surprised you're having that you thought about it, because I also think like the 6-3 makes sense to me, like how when he's healthy and everything's going great and he's like in love with Pam, he's like buying the house, he's doing great on his numbers, or when they're about to have their first kid, he's like selling like crazy. When he's actually driven, he's one of the best managers Dunder Mifflin ever sees. But then like when he's not feeling his great, I can totally see how he gets in that 6 and might retreat and like only wants to talk to people he knows he can be loyal to, like Pam. And so I think he's just like such a 9.
Okay, as you said that, I think the light bulb went off. I think that there was the barrier for me with the 9 is I was like, what 9 would ever bully somebody so ferociously? Like, Jim is such an instigator in like his relationship with Dwight that I was like, oh no, he's not a 9. And I like very much like wrote it off right away. I think without looking a little bit deeper under the surface when I was first thinking about it. But there were certain things that were standing out to me in his character and in the way, you're right, from the beginning, he's like, I don't really want to be here, but I'm comfortable enough here, and there's nothing else that I want to do. And I think that there's that like desire for like comfort and stability and the way that the 9 can
Mm-hmm.
sometimes just like find themselves feeling stuck, but not with enough maybe motivation or drive to get out of that stuckness, if that makes sense. And I was just
Mm-hmm.
rewatching one episode today where he talked about like when Pam was looking at different bands to perform at her and Roy's wedding, and he wanted to watch and kind of make fun of all these different bands, and he was like, these are people that never gave up on their dreams. And he's like, wow, I wonder what it's like to have a dream. And I think that like he does find himself kind of like unmoored and without direction, and I think that that is a challenge that we do see in a lot of type 9s, and that kind of like all clicked into place once you said that. And I think I just had to like look at it a
That
little
is
bit
so interesting to
under
me
the
that you'd say that
surface.
about 9s, and I don't know a ton. I'm going to be completely transparent. We haven't had a 9 on the show
Yes.
yet. And the only thing when I think about the 9s in my life are super, actually, like, I don't know if driven's the right word, but have a pretty clear dream. And so that was an interesting thing. Like, all of them, I think, are in grad school right now. My 9s who are our age.
Interesting.
So that was an interesting thing. But to say, because I am not familiar with that characteristic, but I think it's interesting also that he's like, oh, I wonder what it's like to have a dream, because he also has like a very specific dream when half the characters win the lottery in like the later seasons. And Pam even gets annoyed with him because he's talking about his dream, and it doesn't really include her or Cece, their child. And it maybe even Philip at that point too, where he's like, oh yeah, I want to like bike, and I'm gonna bike to work, and I'm gonna canoe home, and he has this whole thing, and she's like, where are we gonna live? Like, it's like, you're there too. It's very specific. So I don't know, just to throw that in there. But
I think that what I kind of meant by that, and maybe it's not dream as much as like maybe sense of self. I think that, like you said, 9s are very attuned to the people around them in a way that they can fall asleep to themselves and to like their own desires. I think that's key to the type 9. When we look at the different triads, the type 9 is the anchor point of the gut or the instinct triad, and it's because, and it sits in the anchor point, and the 8, the 9, and the 1 all deal with their desires and their gut instincts differently, and the 9 falls asleep to their own instincts. They fall asleep to themselves a lot of times when they're not in health. And so that's what I meant by like not having a clear sense of maybe direction or goals or dreams, because 9s are very others focused and others oriented. And I loved what you had to say about him getting under Dwight's skin, because he knows and understands Dwight so well. It's his understanding of Dwight, and I think that 9s have such great understanding of people that I think gives him that power over Dwight a lot of times. You know what I just remembered? In high school, I asked my prom date to prom. We were such big Office fans, and she was such a big Office fan that I tried to put a stapler in Jell-O, and I like put
how'd it go?
the letters prom in the Jell-O too, and the Jell-O like didn't not set well enough, and so as soon as you like took it out, it all just like fell apart. But it was a fun sentiment, and it was I give a lot of props to Jim. He had some very sturdy Jell-O. That's like one of his classic pranks.
Like, how do you keep? Because I feel like in my mind it's like in the middle of the Jell-O. Like
I think it's layers.
suspended.
You have to like set the very top part of it, like the bottom of the bowl first, then put the stapler in with like more liquid Jell-O, and then let that set, and then do the last layer, you know? I think that's the key.
Yeah. Got it.
Taking notes at home,
cool.
in case you're trying to prank any of your... Once we are finally allowed back in office buildings, there you can use that prank.
Absolutely. I love it. Okay, Lucas. Why don't you tell us about our next character?
I'm so excited. I love our next character, Pam Beesly, future Pam Halpert.
I hate the idea that someone out there hates me. I even hate thinking that Al-Qaeda hates me. I think if they got to know me, they wouldn't hate me. But Karen knows me and she still hates me, so.
And she is the kind-hearted receptionist of Dunder Mifflin. When we first meet her, she gets some more ambitions as the series goes on and becomes a salesperson. And she is in love with Jim, but also engaged to Roy for a very long time.
Mhm.
We actually see during the first Dundies episode that every year she wins the Dundie for longest engagement. And then finally, with the teapot and the grand gestures and everything like that, Jim and Pam finally come together. And she also has a love for art that we see her pursue and kind of toy with throughout the series as well. So I love Pam. She's kind of Jim's partner in crime, but then she and Dwight also develop a really, really special friendship, I think, over the course of the series that I really enjoy.
Absolutely.
So what do you think
Absolutely.
Pam's type on the Enneagram is?
I think she's a 1. I'm
Whoa.
not sure of it.
Okay.
I think that Pam, first of all, I mean, her job is to kind of like keep track and order of the office, which is like, okay, so maybe my gut reaction is like, okay, she's a receptionist, she's an office manager, she's a 1. But also, like, she chooses to be an office manager because she's already doing that, and that's like why she pitches to Saber that she's already been an office manager for so long. And she hasn't, but she's like, okay, I like order. I think of the episode. I have no idea where in the season, in the world this ends up, when she like wants people to clean the microwave and she leaves a note and everyone's like, wow, I cannot believe someone just left a note. And she's like, no, I'm like taking care of this. I'm like, really, like, this is what is right to do. I think of like the Finer Things Club and how she and all her friends are rating and they like have just such an appreciation for quite literally the finer things. And then finally, I also think that Pam has a tricky time seeing herself as others see her, right? Everyone loves her. She's like, except for Angela, maybe, loves her, thinks she's great and that she's doing well. And she tends to have a lot of self-doubt and kind of needs to be nudged in the right direction. And we really see her come into herself by the end of the series. But I think at the beginning, she thinks, you know, she doesn't necessarily deserve the relationship that Jim could give her. And that's why she settles for Roy. She doesn't believe she's like going to be a good enough artist for art school until people push her to do so. And so I think that's where I kind of see that self-doubt and, you know, how beautiful we get to see her come into her own. And by the end, she's like painting murals and standing up for herself. But also she's standing up for herself because she believes it's justice. I'm just like so sure she's a 1. I think she might also though have that wing 9 where she is really in tune to others and really conscious of what's going on around her and not wanting to rock the boat in the same way. Like, I am not by any means a relationship guru, but when we see their marriage kind of crumble at the end of the season, I remember being like, when I first watched it in like freshman year high school, being like, that could not be me, because I just am like, I would have told everyone how I felt the entire time because, you know, I'm a 4. Like, it'd be hard for me to hide that. And I think she hides that to like support Jim, even though she's feeling kind of out of it, even though Jim did. And like both of them kind of had leaned on that 9 and pretending things weren't wrong until they were like, you could not go any further without realizing that how wrong things were.
Yeah, no, I see that. But I definitely see that 9 in her a lot more than I see the type 1. I think you make some really good points, but it's funny because some of the things that you were talking about, I think her experience with art school, especially her experience with Roy and then with Jim later on, really pointed to that 9 for me, of that willingness and sometimes subconscious response to putting her own thoughts and feelings and emotions, kind of pushing them aside or maybe pushing them down because it's the path of least conflict. I mean, I think there's a reason that she wins the longest engagement award for so many years in a row. And I think that we talked about a little bit with Jim too, but like the type 9 can sometimes fall asleep in their own life, in, to put it in a certain phrase that I've read in like The Road Back to You and things like that. And I think that we really see that kind of just like complacency and like almost sleepwalking in her relationship with Roy, especially, where she's like, she knows deep down this isn't going to work out. I think that she knows how she feels about Jim deep down, but she's just going to kind of ignore that because this is easier. This isn't leading to any conflict. Like, everybody's quote unquote happier. if we just don't talk about it. And similarly then, like you said, as they start to develop some of those marital problems later on in the show, she's like, I'm just not going to say anything. Like, I'm just going to be quiet. And I think that that is a coping mechanism or a defense mechanism that is much more indicative to me of the type 9. So I definitely see that 9-wing one, but she was the one that I was like, oh, she's such a 9. And I think maybe that's what blinded me to Jim a little bit, because I was like, oh, Pam's such a 9. And I didn't see Jim as immediately. So it maybe pushed me off of him being a 9 at the beginning when I was typing the characters. But that was just because I was so set on her as a type 9. So I'm surprised by the 1. What do you think?
I still disagree, because I considered the 9, or like I considered the 1 and then found the 9. I think of how, for one, she seems to have a very strong moral code in who she is. Even though she's like madly in love with Jim, she's not moving in with him until they are married. She doesn't want her grandmother to know that she's pregnant before they're married, which, I mean, that doesn't necessarily mean that's like a standard she holds, but I think she has an appreciation for those things.
Or is she more afraid of the conflict from her grandmother finding out?
I don't think so. I think it's a little bit of both. And then like when I think of the moment on her wedding day when her veil rips, and just like, I wanted it to be perfect, and it's like nothing like I wanted. And you know, there's a lot going on there. Mm-hmm. And this is interesting to me. It's the first time we've disagreed in a long way, but a long time. But I just think and I think of how often she stands up for what she thinks is right. And I just don't necessarily think a 9 would do it as consistently as she does. Like, I can't imagine, you know, the people in my life who are 9s, you know, writing that note on their microwave.
Well, I think that's why she writes a note instead of like speaking to the office. And to speak to part of that too, like, I think that her standing up is like her taking that conscious effort in that step, and that like beautiful, like stepping into her power as a 9, as opposed to like her reflex, if that makes sense. I think her natural inclination, and I think where we see her at the beginning of the series, is much more kind of like timid and quiet and in the background. I
will say it's so funny, and we don't type real people on this podcast. Jenna Fisher out loud has said words from the road back to you that are from indicative of the type 1. And so I'm like, I'm like trying to check myself and being like, am I saying Jenna Fisher or Pam? And I do think that one of the beautiful things about The Office, both tricky for the actors now and in The Office, is like they are their characters.
Right.
So I'm having, it's one that I'm having a hard time stepping away from. It's fun because we haven't argued in a minute.
I know. Well, do you remember? And I feel like I'm going to be like, well, you said, but I don't know if you remember when we first were like picking characters to talk about in season 2. And we were like, well, we have to do Pam. And I was like, okay. And you were like, Pam is such a 9. And like, I think that was my compass. I do not think I said that. That
is not on the record. Taken from the record. I never said that. I think you are misremembering the conversation, and I will say that, listeners, this happens a lot.
Okay, that's true. My memory is not always the most reliable. I will admit to that.
In the conversation that I know you're referring to, you were like not sure if we wanted to talk about Jim from The Office. And I said, we have to, because we don't have any 9 representation.
That's exactly the conversation I remember, but I remember talking about Pam.
Well, maybe you thought we were talking about Pam and I thought we were talking about Jim, but I was like in my head and I was talking about Jim.
So I think that is like in my head. Maybe that's not what you said, but in my head I was like, well, Marjana mentioned her being a 9 a long time ago, and now I'm like looking at it and I'm like, yeah, I totally see that. So I think that was part of my guiding light for this too. But,
well, you know what? We work really hard not to talk about the characters off the mic, and this is why, everyone.
Exactly. So
So is this another?
I'm so fascinated about this.
Iron Man? Is this another Iron Man?
Yeah, is this a stalemate? I feel
I'm not budging.
I really don't want to budge either. And a part of it too, I don't think this is my reasoning, but I will say that in my universe where she's a 9, it's really beautiful that like I literally almost called him Pim because all day I've been getting like Pim and Jam in my head. But Jim is like this 9-wing 8, and then she is the beautiful like mirror of that in the 9-wing 1. I see some of that 1, but I really don't think it's her core motivation. I think she more than Jim finds herself asleep to her own wants and desires even.
I just don't necessarily.
I don't think a 1 would stay in that engagement for as long as she did.
I think maybe they would. I don't know. If they truly believe, I don't know. 1's out there. I'm calling my best friend.
Would a 1 break off the engagement? Because like they're all about like doing what's right. And I feel like if they are so committed to their word, I'm kind of thinking about when we were talking about Simon and how he's like so dedicated to like his word and his vow. And like he promised that he was going to do this. He has to follow it through. I
think that's why the second she starts to actually have feelings for Jim, she breaks it off.
So you don't think she felt anything for him for the first 2 seasons though? Because I really think she was like denying her own feelings and emotions there.
Which I also think can be a 1 thing.
But I think is the hallmark of the 9. This is so interesting. It has been a while. So the past like 5 episodes, I feel like we've just been like, yes, yes, yes. And now...
I just don't want you know what? I gave up on the 1 for Captain America and people have been mad about it on social media. And so I'm like, I'm buckling down a little. I'm willing to sit at the 1 wing. The 9 and 1 is like close to me. Man, I'm trying to think of like other situations in which I'm thinking of the party planning committee. How Angela is to her. And obviously 9s don't just get walked over all the time. So I'm like, okay.
Well, and I think I'm thinking too about Angela and how we talked about her as a type 1. And obviously there are very different characters and every type like expresses itself in multiple different ways. But I'm just trying to think about like how those 2 interact and if that like gleans any kind of insight. I kind of want to see what the Enneagram Institute has to say about the like key differences between the 1 and the 9.
Yeah.
Oh,
okay.
This is fascinating, actually. So the Enneagram Institute has these really helpful articles about misidentifying between each of the types. And so, dear listeners, I did just pull up, I'm citing my sources. I did just pull up their article on misidentifying 1s and 9s, and I haven't read anything past the first sentence, but it does say, usually this mistype is caused by confusion about the wing and dominant type, which is exactly where we are at right now.
Mm-hmm.
Is a person a 9 with a 1 wing or a 1 with a 9 wing?
Okay. So I'm reading this, dear listeners. For 1s, however, the principle is foremost, and 1s will drive home their point to convert the other to their view, even if it risks creating upsets and arguments, which is kind of what we just said. But I'm thinking I think it's hard because okay, I'm ready. I think they're both 9s, and the reason why is not because of like Angel's relationship or anyone else's, but I do think Jim and Pam are both 9s. And the fact of like the downfall of their marriage.
Where we see some of those issues later on.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, maybe not downfall. It's a little dramatic because they are still married at the end. But I think
they hit a rocky patch. That's, I think, fair to say.
Yeah, and I think one of the things, because I guess, and it also might just be like where you are in the show. Again, we said this last time, like many seasons is different than like 1, but I'm like, I'm thinking of when she's like, if you're going to be my boyfriend, you have to do this. Like, if you're going to be like in love with me, like boyfriends do this to Roy. And then also I think she kind of like puts the whip a little bit on Jim later on, but I think overall they wouldn't have gotten in that situation if one of them had a very strong principle, like of a 1, she would have converted Jim to whatever her thought pattern was there. And there's no evidence of that through like the whole series.
Right.
So
right.
I will do it, which is a strong wing 1.
Strong.
Can you give me that?
I agree. Totally. And I think like you made some really great points. Like I said, I think it was literally just that like, what's the core motivator and what's the wing? But I think you made a really strong argument for the 1. But it was, and y'all, I think we will even include the link to that article in the show notes because that was super helpful for me, I think, to like see some of those key differences. We love the Enneagram Institute. Their link has been in the show notes from day one, but definitely check out that article. If you are if you are still upset that we are typing her as a 9 instead of a 1, maybe check that out and see kind of where we came to that.
Absolutely.
Okay.
All right. Well, do we even have time for the most important character in the whole series?
Last but not least, I was looking up some Office quotes today, and one of her notable ones was, "I talk so much, I've learned to tune myself out." And I don't know if I've ever related.
The quote I was thinking of.
I don't know if I've ever related to a quote more in my life.
That is so funny. I am totally aligned to that. Yes. So finally, the character, she's one of my favorite people in the whole world, is Kelly Kapoor. And she's an incredible member of the Dunder Mifflin team. She runs the customer service and I believe also customer relations team. I think they kind of use them interchangeably at Dunder Mifflin. She is quirky and fun and colorful. She is a pop culture icon, or she knows all the pop culture icons. I think like in one episode, she's like, "What's wrong with wanting to name my child Usher?" Like, I think it's like Usher, Drake, Timberlake.
Yes.
Ryan Bailey Howard. And so it's just like, she's such a character. She's like very funny. And one of the things that I love is like Mindy Kaling as a writer and a person and an actress brought so much of her own personality and kind of just made it like a spoof on herself. She also brings some like great Indian representation to the show. We get to experience Diwali, and like everything on The Office, it's a little bit of a joke, but that was the first time I learned about a lot of cultural heritage that is in The Office.
Yeah.
When I was younger, and it was like the first couple seasons, I was like, oh, really cool. And I think it was awesome that she is actually an Indian actress and brought that to the forefront. So
totally.
Lucas, tell me what you think about her.
I mean, I love Kelly. I did take a BuzzFeed quiz telling me which Office character I was. And even though I do share a lot of similarities with Andy, I actually got Kelly. So I have had a extra fondness for her ever since. However, I'm not sure that she has a drop of 4 in her because I think a key part of the 4 is self-awareness. And I don't think that Kelly has a ton of self-awareness.
I think she's just not super healthy.
Potentially. I think that she's a type 3. I think that she has that image consciousness. She has that emotion. I think she like lives there in that heart triad and is never afraid to kind of share those emotions, but she's always like, she wants to be the socialite. What I think is interesting is that type 3s are usually very like successful. And maybe we see that in being like hardworking and driven and precise and perfectionistic. But that's not the case for Kelly, because I think that for her, she does not care about like success in the professional world as a like employee at Dunder Mifflin. She cares about success in the social world and in her personal relationships and in like her relationship with Ryan, especially, but also like her just overall perception from the people around her. And I think that she's very, it's funny. I think that she wants to be like well-liked, but she also, like I said, doesn't have that self-awareness to notice when she is just boring people to death with her long rants and monologues and stuff.
Hey, Kelly. What's up?
Nothing. Oh, except, oh my God, Jim, last night, Ryan and I finally hooked up. It was awesome.
That's great. I'm really happy for you.
I know, and it was so funny because we were at this bar with his friends, and I was sitting next to him the whole night, and he wasn't making a move, so in my head, I was like, Ryan, what's taking you so long? And then he kissed me, and I didn't know what to say, so I said, Ryan, what took you so long? I mean, I just said it to him. Can you believe that?
Wow.
Oh my God, Jim, is that embarrassing? I'm embarrassed.
No, don't be.
Oh, thank God, because I was nervous, Jim. You will not believe. I was
bet.
so nervous. But now I have a boyfriend.
All right.
I hooked up with her on February 13th.
So I saw her as a type 3. I think I could be convinced of otherwise, though. I do want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, I think, well, it's interesting. I think you just kind of convinced me because I wasn't 100% sure too. I knew she'd sat on like the 3-4, similar to myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you made a great argument when you just said that she's just like not super self-aware, but also like what success looks like to her is so different than everyone else in the office or just like in daytime. And like she wants to appear successful, I think, more than she wants to like, or even not even successful, but just like she wants to appear hot. I think she said like multiple times.
100%.
And she wants, yeah. And I think I see her as also a 3-wing 4, or that 4 is kind of just like creeping up. It's there, it's present. Where like in the drama and the flair. I think it's hard though. As I said when you were talking, I do think it's very possible she's just not healthy. She might be just like she's definitely none of the characters are really that healthy. They're that's why they're like comedies on a mockumentary.
Yes.
But I will say I think you're right. I think you made an excellent argument. I would just say like I considered the 4 as well, but I think you're right, a 3-wing 4.
Well, and it's funny that you talk about the 4 because the one thing I just thought about, and this is 100% me speaking from personal experience, but the 4 goes to the type 2, the helper in like distress or in like stress, and they take on some of that like possessiveness and like emotional manipulation. And when I think about her relationship with Ryan, like I can definitely see like an unhealthy 4, like just trying to like sink their claws into the people that they want affection and relationship with, if that makes sense. So I wonder about that maybe a little bit, but I don't know. I'm like, am I convincing myself of your number?
Maybe you are, because you convinced me of your number. That's funny. I don't know. I'm feeling pretty clear about the 3.
Okay. I just wanted to put that out there because it was a thought that I had as you were talking. But if we're good with the 3-wing 4, I can definitely see it, and I love it. It's funny. It was a tough debate about like our 6th character from The Office. I think that you have like the 5. Well, and I think maybe Angela too, but obviously we had Dwight and Angela, and we had to have Michael and Jim and Pam. But picking one person from the rest of the cast of characters, I think was really difficult. And I think Kelly definitely earns her place as like...
Oh my gosh. It's funny you say that. I think it took us a second to think of it, but then we're just like, okay, who's our favorite character? And it's like, okay, Kelly.
Yes.
See you there, girl. Yeah, I was like, I don't know if it was that difficult for me.
Well, I think you're just like, oh, who do we pick? Because I think the rest of the characters sit on the same kind of level in terms of like casting and billing and everything. But yes, I mean, I don't know about you, but I kind of feel like we are just like a couple of Kellys. And so Kelly would definitely start her own podcast.
I'm sure it's out there. Oh my goodness, Lucas, this is so fun as always. I love starting off my week with you.
Yes, so much fun. And we, dear listeners, love starting our weeks off with you.
All right, cheers, guys.
Yes, thank you all. We will talk to you next week. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Typecasting. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at TypecastingPod, where you can vote in our weekly polls. Leave a review and be sure to join us next week when we take on more pop culture by the numbers.